When I built this house, I didn't do it to prove anything to anyone. I didn't care about resale value, curb appeal, or what Karen and her manicured HOA kingdom 200 feet away thought about bunker-grade concrete or solar water filtration systems. I built it because I've seen what wind can do when it's angry. 30 years flying commercial jets over the Gulf gave me an intimate view of Mother Nature's tantrums, and I had no intention of letting one flatten me in retirement. The land was cheap, almost suspiciously cheap, but that's how it goes in southern Louisiana. Swampy, storm-worn, but beautiful in its own stubborn way. 1.8 acres of overgrown wildness, right outside the tidy little grid of Grandwater shores. Their perfectly spaced pastel boxes ended in a whisper of pine and cypress. And that's where my world began. The county line slithered right through that woods like a snake, and I made damn sure every deed, survey, and zoning record proved I was on the right side of it. The house went up low and tight, half sunk into the earth with walls thick enough to stop a truck. I added steel storm shutters, hurricane glass, and a sub-foundation rooted deeper than most people's patience. The shed held tools and backup fuel. The water tank had its own UV system. And the generator, oh, she purred like a cat on bourbon. Independent, quiet, resilient, just like I wanted to be. That didn't sit well with the HOA. They started knocking not long after I moved in. Polite at first, brochures in hand. Join the community, they said. Be part of something bigger. As if asphalt paths and ornamental mailboxes made people give a damn about each other. I declined, firmly, kindly at first, then with a cease and desist letter from my attorney after they tried to file a parcel annexation with the parish zoning board. That stunt cost them a small fortune in legal fees. Round one, mine. But they didn't stop. A year later, someone mysteriously updated the HOA boundary map to include my land. Cute trick. Unfortunately for them, I had the original plate, registered, stamped, and notarized. The court laughed them out the door. Last time, they brought bodies. A full-on community action day with folding tables and flyers, trying to rally my non-existent neighbors to sign a petition forcing me in. They didn't get 10 feet past the tree line before my "No trespassing" sign, and the sight of me in camo with a chainsaw stopped the whole operation cold. They packed up in record time. The court eventually ruled that Grandwater Shores and its representatives were prohibited from contacting, approaching, or attempting to incorporate me or my land into their jurisdiction. I framed that ruling and hung it in the shed, just below the bourbon shelf. After that, the peace held. For a while. I worked on the house, added a few raised beds, cleaned up the back edge of the woods. Some days I didn't see another human being at all, and that suited me fine. I kept to myself, didn't wave when I didn't feel like it, and ignored the tight little SUVs that idled at the edge of my fence to take pictures of the bunker house. They didn't understand why I'd gone through so much trouble. Why dig into the earth? Why put up steel shutters in a coastal parish, where people seemed to believe optimism was stronger than wind? I didn't explain. You can't explain the storm to people who've only known blue skies. And then the wind came. They called it Imogen. Pretty name for something that ripped rooftops off like paper napkins. The weather alerts lit up like Christmas on meth. Mandatory evac notices, storm surge maps, flood projections like biblical doom. I checked the generator, reinforced the main door, brought in the tools and the cats. And then I waited. You don't fight a storm like Imogen. You brace for it. You breathe through it. You hope to hell the calculations you made when you poured the concrete were right. When it hit, it sounded like God had decided to start over from scratch. The world outside disappeared, trees groaning, rain horizontal, the sound of debris dragging across the roof like fingernails. For a moment, I remembered being in the cockpit during turbulence over open water. That same gut-level helplessness. Then I took a sip of coffee and went back to my book. That's what the house was built for. I didn't know it yet, but Imogen didn't just tear through buildings and roads. It cracked things open. Reputations, assumptions, boundaries. It was the kind of storm that left people looking for someone to blame. And somehow, I was about to become the perfect target. I didn't open the door until the second morning. The wind had stopped hours before, but I wasn't in a rush to see what had become of the outside world. I'd spent the night listening to the generator hum and the storm scream. And I figured whatever was out there could wait for daylight and dry boots. When I finally unlatched the storm door and stepped out, the silence was worse than the noise had been. The landscape looked like it had been clawed apart by giants. Trees stripped bare, roofs caved in, fences turned to matchsticks. Debris covered everything: shingles, siding, twisted lawn chairs. A kayak sat in the middle of the gravel drive, no water in sight. The smell was rot, seawater, and insulation. I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see the HOA welcome committee crawling out of the wreckage like corporate zombies. But the woods stood broken and quiet. The boundary between me and them shredded down to bark and splinters. I took a walk toward Grandwater Shores, against my better judgment. I didn't want to see it, but something told me I should. The closer I got, the worse it looked. 18 houses had taken direct damage. 2 were gone entirely, just slabs and twisted pipes where homes used to be. The streets were flooded with silence and scattered furniture. A kiddie pool hung from a power line like a war trophy. I found survivors. Some dazed, some bleeding. All of them looking like they'd seen something worse than weather. I helped dig a woman out from under her porch steps. She didn't say a word, just clutched my arm like I was gravity itself. I carried an elderly man half a mile to a church where a few folks had opened up shelter. I gave up my backup generator to a guy with 2 toddlers and a diabetic wife. Not because I liked the HOA or their people, but because nobody deserves to suffer like that. I didn't see Karen. Not then. The 3rd day after the storm, the mail came. Yeah, the damn mail. That's how you know civilization's trying to reboot. A FEMA truck passed me on the road, and right behind it came the old county jeep, with a postal worker tossing damp envelopes into tilted mailboxes like nothing had happened. I found the envelope taped to my gate, laminated like a diploma. Legal letterhead. HOA seal. At first, I thought it was another passive-aggressive flyer about my lawn being disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. I almost laughed, but then I saw the amount. $10,184,233. I read it again. The number didn't change. The letter claimed I was liable for communal restoration of Grandwater Shores, infrastructure, landscaping, housing recovery, because my home remained entirely unscathed during the event, and I had refused to participate in collective stormproofing measures as mandated by local community guidance. Then came the real kicker. Your anomalous immunity from environmental damage raises valid concerns of intentional exposure deflection or non-participatory safeguarding behavior, which may be considered legally actionable under both civil and moral obligation frameworks. They were accusing me, in official language, of somehow directing a hurricane away from my house and into theirs. It was so far beyond absurd, I sat down in the dirt and just stared at it. My house hadn't even lost a window. That was my crime. I brought the letter inside, scanned it, sent it to Raymond, my attorney. He called me back laughing so hard I thought he might stroke out. "That's not a lawsuit," he said, wheezing. "That's an acid trip on stationery. Still, I could hear the warning in his voice. But Miles, if they're serious, this is gonna get ugly. That night, I saw the first post. Someone from Grandwater Shores had uploaded a drone shot, a panorama of the neighborhood in ruins, with one tiny island of safety dead center. My place. Underneath, a caption in bold white text. Coincidence? The likes were climbing. So were the shares. At first, I thought the drone photo would be a one-off, the kind of trashy HOA drama that fizzles out in the group chat. I gave it a day, then another. But then I started seeing it everywhere. Local Facebook groups, Reddit threads, even a write-up in the Bayou Breeze, which I didn't even know still had a print edition. How did one house survive untouched? Could design alone explain it? Or was there something deliberate at play? That was the tone. Not outright accusations, just enough speculation to light a fire under a bored and traumatized community. Someone posted side-by-side satellite images, before and after the storm, with my house circled in red like I was ground zero for some FEMA conspiracy. Another thread had a photo of me carrying a wounded man from the rubble, with the caption, "Odd that he was ready to help so fast," almost like he knew. Within a week, I went from lucky survivor to suspicious anomaly. The HOA hadn't filed anything official yet, but they didn't have to. The internet was doing their dirty work for them. Then came the article. The Saint. Bernard Parish Observer ran a piece titled "The Imogen Immunity, When One House Stands While Others Fall." There was a photo of me, blurry, probably from a neighbor's Ring cam, standing on my porch. The story tiptoed around legal language, but the subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. A retired pilot builds an unregistered, independent structure mere feet from HOA property lines. His home survives untouched, while Grandwater Shores suffers catastrophic loss. Local leaders demand answers unregistered? That part made me snort coffee. My permits were more airtight than their roofs, but the worst wasn't the media. It was the way the people changed. The same folks I'd helped, the woman with the crushed deck, the guy with the diabetic wife, now wouldn't make eye contact when I passed. A couple of teenagers on bikes stopped outside my fence and threw a rock at the mailbox. I found a hand-scrawled note shoved under my windshield wiper at the gas station. Your silence equals your guilt. I tried ignoring it. That lasted maybe 48 hours. Then I got the court summons. An official complaint filed by the Grandwater Shores Homeowners Association, citing refusal to engage in collective mitigation programs as outlined by local HOA Resolution 17C. Possible use of unlicensed weather-resistant technology, contrary to regional atmospheric guidelines. Willful avoidance of community disaster protocols, resulting in disproportionate impact distribution. And my personal favorite, moral failure to align with collective burden-sharing ethics. Apparently, not getting destroyed was now unethical. I took the summons straight to Raymond, who barely blinked. He just looked at me and said, "Well, I hope you weren't planning to retire peacefully." But then he leaned in and added, "This isn't about money, Miles. They're setting you up to take the fall. They lost control of everything. The homes, the narrative, the people. Now they're trying to claw it back through you." I didn't reply. I just looked at the copy of the Observer sitting on his desk, my own face, staring back in black and white. That night, I poured myself a tall glass of whiskey and stood by the window, watching the shadows ripple across my quiet yard. Then I opened my laptop and started digging. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. Raymond always looked like a man who could gut a bank with a stapler and get away with it. He had the kind of permanent smirk that made judges nervous and prosecutors twitchy. I called him 2 days after the summons hit, and he didn't even say hello. Just, "Come by. Bring coffee. We're going to war." His office looked like someone had shaken a legal library and dumped it onto every surface. In the middle of it all was a whiteboard where he'd already started sketching flowcharts, acronyms, and arrows like we were mapping a terrorist cell. They think this is just another bluff. Same playbook. Legal bullying, media noise, manufactured outrage. But this time, they overplayed their hand, he said, jabbing at a bullet point labeled HOA overreach/0 jurisdiction. I handed him the scanned HOA letter, and he grinned. Perfect. We hit back with defamation, violation of prior injunction, and civil harassment. Then we got to work. Raymond filed a formal cease and desist and prepped a countersuit. Meanwhile, I started digging through local property records, FEMA reports, and anything public I could find about Grandwater Shores. The deeper I went, the more things smelled like mildew in a locked attic. For starters, the HOA had filed proof of insurance with the parish after the storm. Documents that looked polished, official, even stamped. But they were fake. I cross-referenced policy numbers with the state insurance database and came up empty. Raymond brought in a contact from FEMA who confirmed it. Grandwater Shores had no valid disaster coverage. What they did have was a stack of fraudulent insurance certificates handed out to homeowners over the past 3 years, all printed with logos of real companies, but traced back to an offshore broker that didn't legally exist. So, all those families? Paying monthly for protection that never existed. And they didn't know. They were blaming me while their own HOA had pocketed the money and left them naked to the storm. That was the first break. The second came in the form of a manila folder left at my gate, sealed with blue painter's tape. No note, no signature. Inside was a USB drive and a typed message. "If you want the truth, look inside. I can't keep doing this." I scanned the drive for viruses, then opened it. What I found made my stomach tighten. Internal HOA emails, financial spreadsheets, meeting transcripts marked confidential. There were records of transfers from the HOA Emergency Reserve Fund to individual personal accounts, some disguised as consulting fees. Others routed through crypto exchanges just months before Imogen hit. But the worst was the strategic memo labeled Phase 3 Consolidation Plan. In cold corporate language, it described a program to absorb adjacent properties through legislative pressure, zoning adjustments, and negative incentive deployment. Translation: force out the holdouts. People like me. My parcel was circled on a digital map, labeled High Priority Resistance Zone. I stared at that for a long time. The next day, I got a knock on the door. Not law enforcement, not press, just a tired man in his late 50s, in a windbreaker 2 sizes too big, and a look that said he'd had enough of pretending. "Name's Tom Brady," he said as I opened the door. "Not that one. I was treasurer on the HOA board. Until last week, he handed me a second flash drive. I can't be seen here. I already know I'm screwed. But after the storm, after seeing what they let happen, I couldn't live with it." "Why me?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because you were the target. You weren't just outside the HOA. You were the symbol of what they couldn't control." He left before I could ask more. That night, Raymond and I sat in my shed with laptops, bourbon, and printouts, covering every flat surface. The more we dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just personal. It was structural. Fraud, misappropriation, conspiracy, and they wanted me out because I proved it was possible to live outside their control. I looked at the laminated court order on the wall, the one that said they couldn't touch me. Then I looked at the flash drive full of receipts proving they'd already tried. We weren't just going to defend ourselves anymore, we were going to burn it down. Courtrooms always smell the same: dust, disinfectant, and the anxiety of people who know they're lying. We walked in through the side door. Raymond looked like he'd just stepped out of a press conference. I wore my nicest button-up, which still made me look like a retired survivalist at a wedding. Grandwater Shores had sent their legal crew, 3 attorneys in matching suits and haircuts, all tight smiles and whiter-than-thou confidence. Karen wasn't in the room yet, but I could feel her coming, like humidity before a thunderclap. This wasn't the final trial. Not yet. Just the preliminary hearing. But the room was full. HOA members packed the benches like it was a town hall revival. Some looked angry. Others looked scared. A few already looked guilty. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a gavel that had clearly seen more action than her patients, opened the session with a weary sigh. Let's be clear. This hearing is to determine whether the Grandwater Shores HOA has standing to pursue civil action against Mr. Waltner, and whether counterclaims related to defamation and harassment may proceed. No theatrics, no speeches. Stick to facts. Raymond stood like it was opening night on Broadway. He laid out the timeline. The storm. The HOA's accusation. The letter demanding over $10 million. The absurd claims about deflecting wind. The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge's eyebrow arched. Then he dropped the first folder. Here are certified engineering reports, signed off by FEMA, confirming that Mr. Waltner's home was built to exceed hurricane-resistant standards. Fully permitted. Fully legal. Independently inspected. Twice next folder. The court order from 3 years ago. The injunction barring HOA from any contact or attempts to annex my property. Third folder. The financial reports. Raymond didn't even dramatize it. He just read from them. HOA Reserve Fund, Q4 of last year. Over $2.4 million withdrawn through unauthorized transfers, disguised as crypto investments, consulting fees, and temporary offshore insurance holding structures. Gasps. Audible gasps. I saw at least one man in the back mouth. What the hell? Raymond held up a USB stick. These are internal emails, spreadsheets, and a strategic document labeled Phase 3 Consolidation Plan, which includes plans to force adjacent landowners into the HOA through pressure tactics, media framing, and targeted legal intimidation. Mr. Waltner was specifically named as a priority removal target. That's when Karen walked in. She was dressed for pity, beige, no makeup, hair slightly mussed like she'd been too devastated to care. She took a seat behind the lawyers and tried to act small. It didn't work, because then Raymond played the tape. A recording. Karen's voice, unmistakable, recorded during a private call with another board member. I don't care if the whole coast washes away, as long as my house sells first. Let the wind do the heavy lifting. And Waltner? Don't worry. We'll bury him in paperwork. Let the press eat him alive. Dead silence. Then a ripple. Murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. The judge banged her gavel once. Order. The HOA lawyers scrambled, claimed the recording was illegal. Raymond presented the chain of custody. Anonymous tip. Verified. Admissible under Louisiana's one-party consent law. The judge allowed it. Then she spoke, slowly, deliberately. The court finds the Grandwater Shores HOA has no legal jurisdiction over Mr. Waltner's property, has violated an active court injunction, and has presented an action based on frivolous and malicious grounds. Furthermore, the court recognizes preliminary evidence of financial misconduct and defamation. She turned to me. Mr. Waltner, Your counterclaim is accepted. Damages, including legal costs, to be determined in a future hearing. A separate referral is being made to the district attorney's office regarding the HOA's financial practices. I didn't react. Not in the room. Not yet. But I saw Karen's face. Not anger. Not panic. Just that flicker of realization. The moment someone knows the story they've been writing just got set on fire. As we left the building, a swarm of journalists descended. Raymond took point. Legal statements only. I said nothing, just kept walking. Back at home, I opened a bottle of the good stuff and sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind what was left of the trees. It was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was the quiet you get when something big breaks, and the pieces haven't finished hitting the floor. The official letter came 4 weeks after the hearing. Plain envelope, county seal. HOA Grandwater Shores, Incorporated. Dissolved. I held the paper for a long time. It was oddly anticlimactic. No parade. No champagne. Just a quiet declaration that the monster was finally dead. A community, or at least what passed for one, had collapsed under the weight of its own bullshit. News traveled fast. The very next morning, trucks showed up at the HOA's community center. County officials, boxy white vans with government plates, evidence bags in hand. They wheeled out filing cabinets, hard drives, entire desktop towers wrapped in anti-static sleeves. I stood at the edge of my fence, coffee in hand, watching it like a spectator at an execution. Karen wasn't there, but later that afternoon, her face hit the local news. She'd been arrested in Denver, booked under suspicion of wire fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of funds. The anchor said she'd sold her house preemptively, knowing the storm was coming. The buyer, apparently, was her sister under a different name. Cute. The newscaster ended with a quote from the sheriff. "We're investigating the possibility of coordinated financial abuse across multiple HOA-managed subdivisions." Turns out, Grandwater Shores wasn't the only HOA she had her fingers in. The fallout was nuclear. 18 families, the same ones that had once glared at me in court, filed civil suits against Karen personally. When they found out the insurance policies were fake, that their dues had gone into vapor, they turned like dogs on raw meat. I heard one guy tried to break into her old house with a crowbar before the sheriff dragged him off. I didn't say a word, didn't post, didn't crow. But I did make one change. I had a sign made. Custom metal, industrial grade, big letters. I bolted it right onto the front gate. Stop. Private property. Not a member of any HOA. Trespassers will be photographed, reported, and publicly mocked. The last part was a joke. Sort of. I installed 2 new motion-activated cameras anyway. I don't go to the gas station much anymore. I drive farther now, out past the other parish line. Some faces still recognize me. Most look away. But that's fine. I never asked to be their mascot. I just wanted to be left alone. Now, they do. Raymond called the day the bank wired the settlement. $2 million and change. Well earned, he said, and with interest. I transferred most of it into a cold wallet and buried the key somewhere under the pecan tree. Not for secrecy, just for peace of mind. The rest I used to install a reinforced greenhouse and rework the solar array. Might as well lean into the apocalypse. Every now and then, someone still tries. A phone call from some TV producer, a podcast invite. I ignore them all. I'm not here to be a story. I lived one. That's enough. The only visitor I ever entertained was Tom Brady, the former treasurer, not the football one. He showed up one evening, weeks after the dust had settled, looking cleaner, less haunted, He handed me a small wooden box. Inside, the original HOA charter, signed years ago, back when Grandwater Shores was just a hopeful idea. He'd found it in the rubble of the records room. The ink was faded, the signatures naive. "I thought you should have this," he said. "You're the only one who beat them without becoming them." I didn't say anything, just nodded and took the box. Later, I burned the contents in the wood stove and poured a double. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the cicadas buzz and the bats cut across the sky. The air smelled like honeysuckle and ozone. Clean. I hadn't asked for a war. But I had built for one. She was younger than I expected. The reporter, I mean, maybe 30. Tan blazer, smart eyes, voice like she practiced it in the mirror. She knocked politely, didn't barge in. That already earned her a few points. "I know you've turned down every request," she said, "but I'm not here for a scandal. I'm here for the truth." I looked at her. Then at the little handheld recorder in her fingers. She followed my eyes. "Off the record, you have my word. Normally, I'd send someone like her packing, especially after everything. But maybe it was the way she said truth, like it still mattered. Maybe it was just a quiet morning, and I had nothing better to do than sip coffee and indulge a stranger." We sat out back on the porch. The new solar array buzzed softly above us. The wind had shifted from coastal to inland, dry and warm. Birds were returning. Even the lizards had made peace with the gravel. She asked about the storm. I gave her the basics. She asked about the HOA. I told her they'd made their own mess, and I just refused to be part of it. She didn't push, didn't interrupt, just listened. Then she asked the question they all ask in the end. "How did your house survive?" I looked at her for a second, not suspiciously, just thoughtfully. "You really want to know?" I said. She nodded. I stood, walked over to the far post of the porch, and pointed at the foundation slab. Thick concrete, steel-braced, and sunk 4 feet into the ground. I pointed to the storm shutters, still spotless after the worst hurricane in 3 decades. The backup battery units, the reinforced roof line, the anchored water system. "I didn't build to impress neighbors," I said. "I built to outlive their mistakes." She scribbled something in her notebook, then looked up. "But you never joined them?" "No." "Not even after they asked nicely?" "They never asked nicely." She smirked. "So you really think it was just preparation? Not luck? Not divine protection?" I leaned on the railing. The breeze kicked up, pushing a few pine needles across the deck. "I didn't summon the storm," I said. "I just knew it was coming." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded once, professionally. "That's going in the article." I didn't mind. As she packed up and walked back to her rental, I watched her disappear past the gate, right under my custom sign. That was the last interview I ever gave, and maybe the first one worth having.